There's a silent danger that destroys entire societies. It doesn't use weapons, it doesn't give grand speeches, and it doesn't need brute force. Yet, it has already wiped out civilizations, strengthened oppressive regimes, and keeps spreading unnoticed. Dietrich Bonhoeffer uncovered this danger and tried to warn the world, but no one wanted to listen. He realized that the real threat isn't the corrupt, the tyrants, or the dictators. It's the ordinary people. The question is, have you ever wondered if you're contributing to this problem without even realizing it? If you think you're in control of what you believe, you might be wrong. Why is stupidity a danger to society? What Bonhoeffer discovered might completely change the way you see the world and yourself. Watch until the end and draw your own conclusions. Stupidity isn't just a lack of intelligence, it's something far more dangerous. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a theologian and philosopher who stood against Nazism, saw stupidity as a moral and social problem, something that corrupts individuals and destroys civilizations. He wasn't talking about people with low IQs, but rather those who refuse to think for themselves. According to Bonhoeffer, a stupid person doesn't question, doesn't analyze, and blindly accepts whatever narrative is imposed on them. And the worst part, stupidity doesn't act alone. It grows and thrives within systems of power. When a group submits to conformity, it creates a bubble where critical thinking is eliminated. Those who think differently are mocked, isolated, or even persecuted. This is how authoritarian leaders consolidate their rule. They don't just rely on brute force, but on people willing to obey without question. Stupidity becomes a shield for power. This mindset doesn't just make control easier, it makes resistance nearly impossible. Bonhoeffer warned, the stupid don't just follow orders, they defend them with passion. They believe they're right, even when faced with undeniable proof to the contrary. That's why entire societies have been manipulated into supporting oppressive regimes, accepting blatant injustices, and even committing atrocities in the name of a cause. The real danger isn't just the corrupt leaders, it's the masses that allow them to exist. Power doesn't need truth to survive. It only needs enough people willing to accept any lie. Bonhoeffer was clear. Stupidity doesn't just obey, it protects the system that controls it. Those in charge understand that ruling is much easier when the population doesn't think, doesn't question, and doesn't resist. History proves this. Totalitarian regimes, manipulative leaders, and corrupt systems have never needed brute force alone. The real weapon of control is mass manipulation. When a government, an institution, or an ideology gets people to blindly believe a narrative, they will defend their oppressors themselves. And if necessary, they will attack anyone who dares to expose the truth. That's the greatest danger. Stupidity doesn't need to be forced, it is cultivated. Simple, easy to accept narratives are created, ones that are hard to question. Fear and repetition do the rest. Those who resist are labeled as traitors, radicals, or enemies of society. And just like that, the people themselves become the main instrument of oppression. Bonhoeffer recognized this pattern in Nazi Germany. Today, it still exists, only in new forms, adapted to modern times. Stupidity isn't just a failure of reasoning, it's a defense mechanism. Bonhoeffer realized that many people take refuge in ignorance to avoid the discomfort of reality. Questioning requires effort, facing uncomfortable truths, and most of all, taking responsibility. For many, it's easier to ignore, obey, and go with the flow than to carry the weight of deep reflection. That's why even people with intellectual capacity can still act foolishly. It's not about intelligence, it's about psychological avoidance. Accepting new ideas creates anxiety. The human brain is wired to seek mental stability, and any thought that threatens one's worldview triggers deep discomfort. Instead of dealing with this, the mind takes shortcuts, denial, conformity, and blind acceptance of whatever feels convenient. This isn't random. Neuroscience studies show that the brain prefers simple narratives, even if they're false, over complex truths that create uncertainty. The more challenging the truth, the greater the tendency to reject it. Bonhoeffer saw this phenomenon while studying Nazi society. Many ordinary Germans weren't monsters, but they also didn't resist. not because they were foolish, but because it was easier to accept the dominant narrative than to confront the brutality of the regime. Stupidity becomes a shield against the weight of moral responsibility. Those who embrace it avoid guilt, avoid pain, and protect themselves inside the comfort of ignorance. And this pattern didn't die with the past. It continues in different forms to this day. Bonhoeffer's theory on stupidity wasn't just a philosophical reflection. It became a real and devastating reality during the rise of Nazism. Adolf Hitler's regime wasn't built solely on military force or direct coercion. It was upheld by a population that chose not to think. Nazism didn't take hold through violence alone, but through the manipulation of the collective mind. When the masses accept a narrative without questioning it, when truth becomes irrelevant and obedience turns into a social virtue, the path to destruction is already set. Hitler understood something fundamental. People don't want the truth, they want security. When a narrative is repeated enough times, it becomes reality, even if it's a lie. Nazi propaganda was built entirely on this principle. The enemy was clearly defined: the Jews, political opponents, and those deemed undesirable. Fear became the ultimate tool of control, and in the face of fear, critical thinking disappears. Those who resisted were labeled as traitors. People didn't just follow orders, they defended them with passion. Bonhoeffer was one of the few voices who saw this happening before it was too late. He didn't just observe, he actively fought against the regime, warning that the greatest danger wasn't Hitler himself, but the people who allowed him to exist. To him, collective stupidity was a bigger problem than individual evil. When a system convinces millions of people that blind obedience is a virtue, it can commit any atrocity without resistance. And that's exactly what happened in Nazi Germany. Collective stupidity didn't disappear after Nazism, it evolved. Today, mind control doesn't need concentration camps or a dictatorial leader. Social media has taken on that role. Ignorance is now mass-produced, without the need for violent enforcement. The algorithm does the dirty work. It reinforces existing beliefs, creates ideological bubbles, and turns convenient lies into absolute truths. What used to be state propaganda is now called a trend or a dominant narrative. Critical thinking is suffocated by the noise of millions of unchallenged opinions. Blind obedience is no longer demanded, it's voluntary. People will accept any idea that makes them feel like they belong, without realizing they're being manipulated. The fear of social exclusion has replaced the fear of physical repression. Anyone who dares to challenge the dominant narrative faces cancellation, public humiliation, and even loss of opportunities. Bonhoeffer would have understood exactly what's happening. The new tool of power isn't the military, it's information control. Modern society doesn't need to be forced into obedience. It polices and punishes itself. Every click, every share, every like strengthens the system. The truth doesn't need to be destroyed, it just needs to be ignored. Just like in the past, stupidity isn't just an individual problem anymore. It has become a social epidemic, programmed, encouraged, and profited from by those who benefit the most. If stupidity spreads like a virus, is there a way to build immunity? Bonhoeffer believed there was. He argued that the antidote to stupidity isn't just knowledge, it's independent thinking. Having access to information isn't enough. It takes courage to question, to step out of the comfort of conformity, and to challenge collective thinking. The first step to resisting is understanding that ignorance isn't just a lack of knowledge, it's an active choice not to think. Critical thinking doesn't just happen by chance, it must be cultivated. This requires three fundamental things: intellectual autonomy, stop consuming information passively and develop the habit of questioning everything; tolerance for discomfort, learn to deal with inconvenient truths without retreating to comforting and easy beliefs; social courage, resist group pressure and refuse to conform blindly, even when it means facing rejection. Bonhoeffer knew that resisting stupidity doesn't happen through mass movements. It starts with individuals. That's why oppressive systems fear those who think for themselves. A society that questions is a society that is difficult to control. True freedom isn't just about politics. It's about the ability to see beyond manipulation. Bonhoeffer left us with a powerful warning. The greatest threat to society isn't the tyrants. It's the millions of people who, by choice or convenience, allow them to exist. Stupidity isn't just a matter of intelligence. It's a collective disease that destroys civilizations. And history has proven this time and time again. Those who refuse to think become disposable pawns in the game of the powerful. What separates those who fall into the trap of ignorance from those who resist? The decision to question. Critical thinking isn't something you're born with, it's a daily choice. It means challenging certainties, testing narratives, and looking beyond the surface. It's not an easy path, but it's the only path to true freedom. The question is, are you willing to pay that price? If this content made you think, don't keep this message to yourself. Share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear this. The first step to changing reality is spreading this conversation. Now drop a comment below. Do you think society today is smarter or dumber than in the past? I want to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to hit the like button so this message reaches more people. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep receiving content that challenges your mind and expands your awareness. Your support makes all the difference. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.